Welcome to the Gay Buddhist Forum, where teachers from all schools of Buddhism offer their perspectives on the Dharma and its application in modern times, especially for LGBTQI audiences. These talks are offered freely to the world and made possible by appreciative listeners. If you would like to support our efforts to share the Dharma with underserved audiences, please visit gaybuddhist.org. There you can donate, find a list of upcoming speakers, or enjoy many hundreds of these recorded talks dating back to 1996.
Bill Weber. I'm honored to be here and speaking to you all today. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
I started sitting with GBF, I think probably about 7 years ago or so, and back when they were over on Page Street. And I haven't been sitting with GBF much lately. I sit with a Sangha that meets at the Unitarian Church on Sunday nights with Eugene Cash, who's currently my teacher. But I speak to you today mainly as a lover of the Dharma. The Dharma has been very rich and wonderful for my life. And so I speak to you today in hopes that I can share some of that with you. And not as an expert, but as somebody who is studying and, like I say, loves the Dharma very much. I'm currently involved in this program up at Spirit Rock called the CDL program. It's the Community Dharma Leaders program. And they have 80 of us from around the country where we're in this 2.5-year program where they're helping to train us to take the Dharma out into our communities. And as I was sitting here today, I was thinking, I find I get nervous presenting the Dharma to people. And I was like, well, why do I want to do this? Why don't I just sit back and enjoy it and not have to worry about talking about it or presenting it and alleviate that nervousness and that fear? But I do want to share it, and I hope some of what I say can be a benefit for some people here. I'm going to talk today a little bit about truth, which is, a nice, big, broad, scary topic. About 4 years ago, I quit my job of 8 years. I was a videotape editor, and decided I was going to take a year off on the road. And I bought myself a van to live in. I rented out my house. And part of what I wanted to do in this year was to do a lot of long retreat practice. So I did probably about 100 days of silent retreat during that course of that year. And the last retreat I went on was not too far away from here. And it was a 14-day retreat, I believe. And I was having a lot of anger. I was angry at a friend. And I was angry that I was spending so much of my retreat being angry. And it was just not fun. And I thought, I've been doing all of this work. Why can't I just, gain the fruits of the practice, the deep relaxation and the deep insights and all that. But I was angry. Until finally, towards the end of that retreat, it just sort of dawned on me. It's like, oh, I'm angry. This is what's true for me right now. I'm not in deep relaxation. My body is hot, it's tense, my mind is full of thoughts, I get lost in them. This is what's true for me right now. And I don't know if many of you have been on long retreats, or even short retreats, but often the format is you interview with a teacher. You have a teacher at the retreat, and in the course of the silence, you have 5 or 10 minutes where you go and you can speak to the teacher every day or every other day. And I went to my teacher and I said, this is really about telling the truth, isn't it? And the teacher looked at me and said, that's exactly what the practice is about. It's about telling the truth. That was sort of a big revelation for me, and it really helped open up a lot of things. It took me a long time to get to what I think is sort of a simple, basic truth, but it really helped open up things to me when I started to apply that idea of telling the truth moment by moment to my life. While I'm sitting in wherever I am in the course of a day. And I can always come back to it. Right now, I feel fairly relaxed. My hands are a little bit cold, a little bit of tension in the body, a little bit of runniness in the nose. This is my truth right now. This is what I'm experiencing in this moment. And this is really sort of what our practice is about. Certainly part of it. I'm sure as you all sat here for a half an hour, you found many things that were true for you that you could relate to in probably a variety of ways, and that probably changed during the course of the half an hour. When I was sitting up here, there were times I was really relaxed and thought, oh boy, I'm going to be comfortable talking. And then I would think, talking, body would go back up tense again. So, it would change during the course of my sitting up here. So that's one of the real beauties of this practice, is to take the time to meditate, to sit, to pay attention to what is true for you right now. And in the course of the day, we don't allow ourselves, I believe, a lot of opportunity to do that. What is true for me? What are the truths that I need to listen to right now? Is there a lot of fear in my life? Is there a lot of anger? Is there a lot of joy right now? Just to pay attention to that. The dictionary defines truth as exact accordance with that which is. To be in alignment with what is going on for us, to be there for it, to be alive with it. When I was introduced to Buddhism about 10 years ago, and a therapist of mine gave me a book by Jack Kornfield and Joseph Goldstein, two great teachers in the West. And I read it and I thought, this really rings true for me. There's a lot of truth in this. I'd always sort of felt like I was a spiritual person. I was raised an Episcopalian, but it never rang that true for me. But when I started reading Buddhism, it's like, yes, this rings true for me. And one thing I really like about the teachings of the Buddha is that it's not presented as truth. The suttas, the teaching of the Buddha, that were written 400 years after the Buddha's death, each teaching begins, thus I have heard, or thus have I heard, as it's translated. It's not presented as, this is so, these are the commandments, this is exactly what is. It's like, it's presented almost as myth. Thus have I heard. And the Buddha always said, don't take me for what I say, experience for yourself. I actually love that. I mean, it's not, we aren't to take this. We're to experience it for ourselves. We're to see what rings true in it for us. There's three basic characteristics of experience that the Buddha talks about. And they're truths that we can find early on in our practice. One of those truths being the truth of impermanence. Nothing stays. Nothing stays around. As I was talking about when I was sitting earlier, my experiences would constantly change during the course of my sitting up here for half an hour. I've found nothing that's really permanent. And if we can rest with that truth, things start to open for us a bit. But that's one of the three characteristic truths of our experience. Things are impermanent. Things don't stay. When we, excuse me for... There are three jewels in Buddhism. There's the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. When we take refuge in those three jewels. You'll often notice a bell will be rung 3 times, or people will bow 3 times. It's taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. All of equal importance, said the Buddha. And there's different ways to look at it. And sometimes when I take refuge in the Buddha, I take refuge in being awake and being present in this moment. And when I take refuge in the Dharma, I take refuge in the truth, oftentimes, into what is true, and into my search for what is true. And the Sangha, which you take refuge in, this is community. It's us. It's sharing with like-minded people. But I do consciously sometimes take refuge in the path of seeking and looking and trying to live what is true. The Buddha said the gift of truth is the greatest gift. The taste of truth is the sweetest taste. The love of the truth is the greatest love. Buddhism has taken many forms in its 2,500 years around the planet. When it goes into a culture, it adapts sort of the flavor of that culture. And so it has many forms. Even here in San Francisco, there's many different ways to practice the teachings of the Buddha. But there's one thing that's common amongst all the lineages, amongst all the practices, and that is the adherence to the Four Noble Truths. And they're called the Four Noble Truths. There again, come see for yourself. Thus I have heard. The first noble truth is the truth that there is suffering. It certainly didn't take me long to realize that there is suffering in my life. Especially in the past couple of weeks, it's been really easy to find suffering very close to the surface, or right on the burner all the time. When I was on retreat and I was angry, there was some suffering involved in the anger, but a lot of my suffering was around not wanting to be angry. I wanted something else. I wanted to be peaceful. I wanted to be gaining insight. I didn't want to be angry. There were all these extra layers of suffering that were added on just to the simple fact that I was angry. This leads to the second noble truth, and that there are causes to suffering, and those causes being greed, hate, and delusion. I was clinging for something that I didn't have when I was angry. I wasn't peaceful. I wanted to be peaceful, so I was grasping for something that I didn't have, and I was pushing away something that I did. I didn't want to be with that anger. So I was denying that. So I was adding to that suffering. My relationship to what was true for me in that moment, to my anger, was one that was causing me a lot of extra suffering that I really didn't have to have. Which then leads to the third noble truth, that there can be cessation to suffering. There can be freedom from the suffering. When I realized that I was just simply angry and that I didn't have to be having this adversary reaction to it, it opened up. A lot of that extra suffering I was adding on to it dissipated. I didn't have that extra suffering. So when we look at what is true for us in any particular moment, we can also look at our relationship to what is true for us. Is there hatred, or is there an aversion to it? Do we want to push it away? Or are we have great desire for some other state that we aren't currently experiencing? Or can we just be with what is true for us in that moment? One of my teachers talks a lot about the Zen tradition of what is a life of practice, what you gain from a life of practice. And he said that in the Zen tradition they say appropriate response. In my anger, I had a choice of appropriate response. I could act out on that anger, or I could just sort of take the anger for what it is and open to it and feel what it felt like in my body, to feel what it felt like in my emotional state. And as I did that, I realized that in my body it felt hot, it felt tense. And in my emotional state, when I really opened to it and just sat with it and let it be with whatever it needed to be, I realized that my anger was based around a lot of fear, around a lot of not wanting to be lonely because I was angry at this other person for causing me harm. But what really sort of opened up to me was I was hurt by this other person's aggression towards me. I felt hurt. I felt unloved. And then, so the anger just evolved into something else, and then that, after time, faded away to some degree, which leads me to which leads me to something else. We have our own personal truths. We have our own makeup of who we are as people that are our own truths. And we each have different ones in this room. And that can cause us a lot of suffering depending on our relationship to our own personal truths. When I was about 6 years old, I realized I was gay. And I imagine, since I'm speaking to a gay Buddhist fellowship, that most people in here can relate to that. Not to being maybe that young, but certainly to some of the suffering that came from early revelations of being a homosexual. I did not like being gay. Through my teens, I did not like it at all, and I suffered greatly. I had great aversion to it. To the point where I was in college, I was considering suicide. I thought, I can't be this way. That was back in 1971, and being gay wasn't quite as much in the. You didn't see so much of it back then. You didn't have a Folsom Street Parade or a gay film festival or Ellen on television. So, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that too. So I had, I was really suffering from it until finally at one point I said, I'm going to accept this. I'm going to allow this in my life. And things started to change dramatically. A lot of that suffering left. That suicidal tendency I had wasn't there anymore. Which is a great relief. Now I've been out, I've accepted it for some, getting close to 30 years now, I guess. And I still realize that my acceptance isn't total. There's still places in myself where I haven't totally accepted it. Sometimes I'll be out with my partner and I'll be out in the Midwest or something, and I still feel these looks of hate and repulsion coming my way, and I take that on. My own homophobia takes that on a bit, and I continue to suffer because my allowance and acceptance of my own personal truth of who I am isn't total yet. So there's still suffering that comes along with that. But there's also has to be that allowance for me to still feel that fear sometimes when I'm out in that place and to still not be 100% comfortable. I still have to allow that too, because that is also part of me. And to deny that and to want to be something else is not being in alignment with my own truth. A few months ago I went back to my home state of Kansas, and I went to a high school reunion, our 30th high school reunion. And there were a lot of people there I had known since the third grade, so people I'd known for a long time. And one thing that really struck me was how the personalities we had in third grade are the personalities we have now. There were, the shy person was still shy. The loud mouth was still a loud mouth. The traits that we had that we exhibited as 8-year-olds, we exhibit as 48, 50-year-olds. And I don't know about you, but I didn't really pick many of mine. They just sort of were there for me, and they always have been there for me. I've always been a bit of a martyr type. I've always been headstrong. I've always been impulsive. I've always wanted to be the center of attention. And I don't know where that came from, but it was true for me when I was a kid. It's true for me now. And that was true for all these people I saw at my high school reunion. I keep coming more and more to the realization that I have to just accept that. And there has to be some allowance of that for me to be, like I say, in alignment with my own truth. There's a great teacher who's been a teacher in the West for years, Ram Dass. And I saw him speak a number of years ago, and he talked about doing 30 years of intense work on himself. He said that he had done, intense psychedelic work and spiritual work and sitting work and therapy work and all this intense work on himself. And Ram Dass is a sort of high-strung East Coast being. I don't know if you've met him, but he's and he said, after all that work, he hadn't lost one of his neuroses. They all were still there. But what had changed is now he has them in for tea. So his relationship to him has changed, and I think that's really key. So now when I see my own martyrdom coming up, I can welcome it. I can say, oh yeah, there's that part of Bill again. There's that part of me again. And I can welcome it or have it in for tea and not have this adversary relationship with it. I don't have to add to that suffering with it. And once I have it in, I can respond appropriately. I don't have to become a martyr. I don't have to put myself and those that are putting me up the cross. I don't have to put everybody through it. I can respond appropriately. And I can have some freedom, which is the third noble truth. It's relief and freedom from that suffering that we impose on ourselves oftentimes. Another thing that came up in my high school reunion was how old everybody was. Everybody else. Thank you, Jack. which was part of my reaction, because I like to deny my own aging process. I don't like to face that sometimes, and I go to great lengths around that. I mean, I put on my face cream every morning, and I shave most of my gray off, so I don't have to look quite as old and stuff. But that is also, part of what it is to be in this life is to have sickness, old age, and death, and how much we can be in alignment with those truths. And I realize that I put myself through a lot of suffering because I am getting older. And how am I going to continue to deal with that as I continue to get older? And it's going to become more and more apparent. And how much can I be in alignment to that truth? Or how much am I going to add to my suffering by denying that? And I heard a great one last night that Helen Gurley Brown, before she goes out, puts her face in ice water for like 2 hours to tighten it all up. So she goes out and she's like stone cold, but she looks younger. And it's like all that suffering, plus she's just denying the fact that, she's 80 years old now. Say what?
She looks bad.
Yeah. And think of how beautiful some people look when they're old and they just allow themselves to be that way. And how silly some people look when they go to great lengths to try to not be that way. Also, when I was back in Kansas, I went and visited this good friend of mine from high school. When we went to college, I went to Kansas University and he went to Harvard, graduated with honors from Harvard. And then he got out of Harvard and he went into a mental institution. And he's pretty much been in one ever since. And he's a very sweet guy, very bright and very gifted, very warm-hearted. And I went and spent some time with him. And he told me, he said, I suffer from constant hallucinations. They just never really leave me. And I hear voices all the time. They're always talking to me. And I'm lucky because they're friendly voices. They aren't evil, they aren't angry, they don't tell me nasty things. They're pretty much friendly voices. But he also told me that he's learned to accept it. He said, this is what I've been given. This is what I have to live with. And I'm okay with it now. And it was like, wow, for me. There's things in myself that I have a hard time accepting about sort of what I've been given. And my own personality and things. And for him to say that, and I actually felt it from him, that he was at peace with sort of what his lot was. And I thought, boy, there's a great teaching there for me. How can I accept more and more in my life and not be an adversary to it? So it's to really sort of be awake, to be in alignment with our truth as things constantly change, as they constantly unfold. I want to talk a little bit about identity with sort of what's going on right now too, because I found that's been a tricky situation for me. When I was angry at this retreat, I could identify as I am angry. And instead of saying I am angry, I also am realizing there's another way to look at it, and it's there is anger. There is anger arising. Which doesn't necessarily mean I'm an angry person. It means there's the experience of anger going on right now. So it's not to cling to the momentary truth that is in front of us right now. And as a gay person, I find that I can cling to that truth sometimes. That is my truth. I'm a homosexual. When that in and of itself can be very limiting, because we're all so much more than just being a gay person. I just finished making a documentary film, and so for a while, part of my truth was I was a filmmaker, and that also. I was very conscious of the identity around that, of being a filmmaker, because there can be this great sort of boosting of ego around that identity. When I went back to my high school reunion, people said, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I just made a film." "Oh, you're a filmmaker." It had all this. "Oh, yes, I'm a filmmaker." But for one thing, it was it's a partial identity. It's a partial truth. I'm a filmmaker, but I'm many more things. I was making a film. And not to get caught up in that identity of being somebody, which can really sort of limit us and close us off to other truths that happen around us. So for me, part of the practice is constantly looking at what is true. What is true now? What is true now? Constantly coming back to that. As I sit on the cushion, as I do walking meditation, or as I just go through my life, I can always sort of come back to it. What is true right now? And one thing I found really helpful is paying attention to what's going on in my body. Because the body is a great sort of barometer of sort of where you're at. You can feel tension, you can feel openness, you can feel, it'll give you a good clue of sort of where you're at right now. And just sort of say, check in with it and say, am I okay with it? Can I allow it? Can I accept it? There's I believe there's a Korean monk who goes around all the time saying, "What is this? What is this?" So it's sort of looking all the time. What is this experience? Part of what he's pointing to too is there are the relative truths about sort of who I am, who we are, and then they're the absolute truths, the much bigger truths of really what's this life about? What is this life? To maybe play around with both those truths sometimes. There's a story in one of Mark Epstein's books. Mark Epstein's a Buddhist therapist who's written a number of books on sort of Buddhist therapy that sort of relates to this dealing between the relative truth and the absolute truth. And also the quest of what is this. There was a Dharma debate one time where they had many Dharma people from around the globe come, and they had a Zen monk in Dharma debate with a Tibetan monk. And the Zen monk comes in dark, black and gray robes, very somber, very serious, and sits down. And the Tibetan monk comes in these huge, colorful, flowing robes and, sits down. And they both have their little entourage with them and their translators. And they allow the Zen monk to speak first. And he gets up and holds up an orange and sort of points it to the Tibetan monk and says, "What is this? What is this?" And the Tibetan monk just sort of looks at him. And the said monk gets sort of irritated and says, "What is this?" And the Tibetan monk starts talking to his translator. And the translator says, "What is the matter with him? Doesn't he have oranges in his country?" That was the end of the debate. It went no further. These are both very serious Dharma practitioners. I encourage you all to sort of consider both in your practice. An orange is an orange, but it's also it like contains the elements. It contains the sun. It contains nourishment. It embodies impermanence. It can be very rich. I've talked about the first three noble truths, and I want to just quickly talk about the fourth noble truth, which is really beautiful. And it's the Eightfold Path. And it's sort of a guideline, a handbook, a fertilizer to create the environment for us to see our truths more clearly and to live with our truths more fully. It contains the Eightfold Path, as it's sort of obvious, contains 8 pieces to it, but it contains pieces about sort of how to live, and to live in sort of a moral ground where it is easier for us to live with these truths, and where we can see them more clearly. There are grounds of right speech, right livelihood, right action. There's also the grounds for good practice, for also helping to see these truths more clearly. The grounds for right concentration, right mindfulness, and right effort, where we can. It's sitting here. It's sitting here on our cushions or on our chairs, and seeing moment by moment what is true and what is up for us, and developing the concentration and the wisdom to be with that, and the last 2 parts of the path of wisdom, the right understanding and right view, so we can live with a more open heart and more compassion. So, the Eightfold Path within and of itself there are many talks within that, and I encourage you all to experience for yourself. That's pretty much what I had to say today. I almost changed what I wanted to speak about, and I wanted to speak very briefly on that with the events of what have happened in the last couple of weeks. The path of following Buddhism is a path in this culture of going against the stream, of going against sort of the norm of our culture. We're told to live simply, to not consume that much, or encouraged, to look at our consumption and things like that. To look carefully at how we react to anger. To look at our connection to wanting peace and to having compassion for all people. To having compassion for all people, including the Taliban, including George Bush. And it's a difficult path, but I think these days it's critical. It's really critical, I think. So I encourage you all to be Buddhist radicals and follow the path, because the culture's in dire need of it right now. So I thank you for listening, and I open it up to questions or comments or feedback or whatever. Please.
I want to say thank you. While you're talking, you were touching a lot of different things. You said, "Oh, I want to respond to that, I want to respond to and so on. When you say you were to talk about the Dharma and so on, I said, oh, another academic talk. And I heard so many dry talks about Buddhism, and I love what you did because you brought your personal life into it, which made me relate to what you're talking about. Truth to me, I see a little bit different than you do. Doesn't make you wrong, you're right. It's just the way we see it. To me, truth is unchanging reality. It means everything that is there and will never change. When anger occurred to me and so on, I know it will not stay there. I wouldn't allow it to stay there. I know it passes. So it's a truth for the moment, but not for the long term. And I remember I had a teacher, she was a Christian Scientist, and I said, what do you do? I mean, if I go down to the supermarket, buy happiness in a can, I would do that. And what do I do? And she said, you acknowledge your state of mind and you replace it with something better. And I love that phrase, it always stayed with me, because there is something wrong about being angry. There's something wrong about denying that the anger is there. But to hold on to it, that's wrong. And how do I get out of it? That was by replacing with something better. And that's always been my guideline every time I go along. That doesn't mean anger bubbles up every time, and so on and so forth. So that's the kind of feeling I have about that truth. You talk about the greater truth and the smaller truth. But the greater truth is that I'm divine. And everybody is. And all the other things is passing. And that's what I got out of Buddhism. Thank you very much.
Thank you. And I also appreciate you putting in your own experience and what you found true and helpful. The only thing I'd like to add to that too is, and I like the idea of considering replacing unwholesome states with wholesome states. It's sort of one way to look at it. But to also be careful that if it's not easy to do, how one might judge themselves and continue to judge the state sometimes, because that could add more suffering onto it. If you aren't able to at some point say to replace your anger with loving kindness or something, to be careful about judging yourself and saying, I've failed or I can't do it or whatever, because that could just add more suffering on again. But thank you. Please.
Do you see any purpose to suffering?
Well, first off, there just is suffering. It's part of our condition. Personally, I think I've learned a lot from suffering. I've even said sometimes I think that it would do me good to suffer more, which is a ridiculous thing. But I haven't had. My life has been very blessed. I haven't had a lot of the really great sufferings, like many people on this planet are experiencing greatly, like starving, rape, torture, loss of family, loss of mate. It goes on and on and on. I've been almost immune to all of that, and I'm thinking, because that's really when the pedal to the metal is sort of put to the test, or whatever that phrase is, because you really sort of see I'll really see how much I can really allow and accept things when I really have to maybe go through some of those great sufferings. But sure, I think they're great lessons to be learned. And I think tremendous open-heartedness that can come from it. I was in New York when the planes hit, and one of the things I experienced most in New York was a huge open-heartedness that came out of that. And I experienced it here, the same thing. Thank you.
Other questions?
Snake.
On the subject of suffering, sometimes I think suffering is simply an embodiment of compassion. desire to get away from it is the motivation to change. So it's both okay and serves to
Right.
there is an exit.
Right. I was with a teacher one time, and he said, if you find yourself watching the news and and hurting because of what you're seeing and hearing, he says, feel how open your heart is. So suffering, it really puts us in touch with our compassion sometimes, I think. Thanks.
I was also say thank you for speaking. For me, I guess I'm seeing this now in my life, because I've been going through some emotional stuff lately, but and I used to just try to push down my emotions in my life, because I've had a lot of stuff happen for me. But I guess it's like a yin and yang effect, and there is there's a line, there's like in moderation of where you feel you need to balance that out, where you feel pain and you feel joy or whatever, and you have to have stuff equal to both and live in that and be able to, or at least feel free in that, not let that to bother you or trap you.
Great. Thanks a lot. That's really important. The path of the Buddha is called the middle path, and he talks about the 10,000 joys and the 10,000 sufferings, and they're equal.
Right.
Yeah. And the trick is too that when you're feeling joy, is not to say I want this forever.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. There's a because I know in my life I've tried to push the pain down,
Yeah.
And now I'm seeing that now. Just from what you said and everything, I'm starting to I'm trying to understand myself better, at least in that, but it's hard. It's very hard.
Yeah. Yeah. I struggle with it all the time. Yeah. Thanks.
I just touched on an interesting sense that the suffering is part of that. In my family, there was always a photograph of different groupings from a Thanksgiving among the larger family, and they were, in my mind, they were always happy pictures. And then a few years ago, my mother had been sorted, and she brought old report cards. She was trying to get us to take things off our hands, and there was this long roll of film, and we didn't know what it was, so I had it developed, and it was all the shots that were not developed at this family picnic. And one of my aunts, that picnic, was soon to die, and all these capital shots were like grandparents in anguish, and looking at their daughter who was soon to die, which they didn't make it in the pictures that got framed, but this was the undertone of this mythically happy gathering, and it just, it's there.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, Bill, thank you very much for a very compassionate and heartfelt comment.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Gay Buddhist Forum. If you would like to hear several new talks per month and be notified of upcoming speakers so you can participate live, please subscribe to this podcast, like us on Facebook, and join our mailing list by visiting gaybuddhist.org.